All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really detailed, heavily documented forensic archive that looks at a pretty chilling concept, the systemic erasure of history. And we aren't just talking about, forgetting a few dates or losing old books. The sources we're exploring today outline how the historical memory of the Sikh community was systematically dismantled, and they argue it was done through three very distinct pillars: architectural demolition, administrative silence, and modern cultural censorship. It's a heavy, complex topic for sure, but we're going to break it all down, strictly following the investigative records and arguments presented in the source material. So to start off, let's contrast two vastly different approaches to historical preservation highlighted in the text. Over in Italy, under their Codice dei Beni Culturali, ancient sites like the Roman Forum are fiercely protected. I mean, if you tried to demolish them, you'd be hit with criminal sanctions. Memory is treated as hard evidence. But according to the archive, things played out very differently in India. The text notes that under the Land Acquisition Act, the state actually authorized the demolition of the 16th century lanes of Guru Kachak in Amritsar. This was the historic, deeply sacred settlement right around the Golden Temple. And the source points out that this destruction wasn't prosecuted at all. Instead, it was celebrated as civic improvement. The origin story of this project is absolutely crucial to understand. According to the documents, it originally kicked off in 1988 as a tactical military security buffer after paramilitary operations. The goal was to clear a 30-meter perimeter around the Golden Temple. But then, in 1993, under new leadership, this exact same project got a major rebrand. The literal 30 meters of physical demolition didn't change an inch. What changed was the vocabulary. That cleared tactical zone was suddenly landscaped, lit up, and presented to the public as a beautification corridor, which became known as the Galliara project. Now 859. That number brilliantly and tragically illustrates the human cost of that so-called beautification. The archive documents that creating this polished plaza displaced 859 families. It led to the demolition of 500 houses and over 1,100 shops, effectively wiping out centuries of Sikh architectural heritage in the area. And perhaps the most astonishing detail here, the source notes that all of this was pushed through without any formal heritage impact assessments. The kind of standard institutional protocols you'd expect for a site with such massive civilizational importance. And the author of our source argues this physical erasure didn't just end in the 1990s. It actually evolved. They point to a much more recent initiative from 2012 to 2017 called the Heritage Street Project. Basically, this project took these authentic, organically developed pilgrim routes and replaced them with a highly standardized, commercially Disney-fied tourist experience. We're talking uniform facades, very photogenic amber lighting, and a heavily curated vibe. The archive makes the case that while it might look like a beautiful pedestrian corridor to a visiting tourist, it essentially functioned as another layer of architectural erasure, stripping away 400 years of genuine visual history and swapping it out for a simulation. Which brings us to this incredibly striking metaphor from the archive. The authors say the Galliara is the polished photograph administrators gladly take credit for, but the negative space in that photograph, that represents a massive, documented human rights crisis that was happening simultaneously right in that exact same district. It's a powerful transition in the text that moves us from the physical demolition of buildings into a deeply unsettling era of administrative erasure, where people were going missing. And the forensic record here is staggering: 2,097 illegal cremations. And to be clear, the source emphasizes that this isn't some rough estimate. This is the official forensic count confirmed by India's Central Bureau of Investigation, and it was noted by the Supreme Court of India. These 2,097 cremations happened across 3 specific cremation grounds in the Amritsar district during the exact same time frame that the beautification project was being rolled out. When you look at the breakdown of the data provided in the source, the reality gets even darker. Out of that total, 1,238 of those bodies were entirely unidentified. The archive goes out of its way to emphasize that these individuals were burned without post-mortem medical examinations, without death certificates, and without any of the mandatory magisterial inquiries that the law literally requires to determine a cause of death. Essentially, the argument is that these people were disposed of without any official trace that their statutory rights even existed. So you're probably wondering, if there were no official death certificates, how on earth do we even know about all this? Well, the forensic arithmetic of these mass cremations was uncovered by a man named Jaswant Singh Khalra. He was a bank manager and a human rights activist, and his methodology was as brilliant as it was devastating. Since the official records were hidden, Khalra went straight to the municipal logs and started cross-referencing the state's firewood purchases to count the unclaimed dead. Think about it. The state had to buy firewood to burn the bodies, right? So Khalra used those exact municipal requisition vouchers to mathematically prove the sheer scale of the disappearances.
But because Khalra exposed this massive violation, the archive documents how he became a target himself. He was abducted in broad daylight on September 6, 1995, right outside his own home, by Punjab police. Just 5 days later, the Supreme Court actually issued a notice regarding his disappearance. Yet, later witness testimony placed Khalra alive in illegal police custody all the way until October 24. That is an exact, documented window of 49 days.
Which leads the authors of the archive to pose this glaring, unavoidable question. Where was the civilian administration during those 49 days? The district magistrate's office held the statutory power here. They could have issued search warrants, they could have demanded written police reports, or escalated the whole thing up to the governor. But according to the extensive documentation we're reviewing today, that office produced absolutely no public documentary record to intervene while Khalra was known to be alive. He was eventually murdered, and the authors argue that the silence of the administration during those 49 days essentially sealed his fate. Okay, so we've seen the arguments around physical demolition and administrative silence. But how does this concept of erasure function today? Well, the archive now shifts its focus to detail how the historical record of these specific events is currently being systematically scrubbed from digital, cultural, and educational spaces. They argue it's through a modern censorship apparatus designed to fragment Sikh identity and memory. A perfect example they give is the film Punjab 95, which is a cinematic biopic about Jaswant Singh Khalra in his investigation. The Central Board of Film Certification in India demanded an unbelievable 127 cuts to the movie. And the most astonishing demand of all, they actually wanted the filmmaker to completely erase Khalra's real name from the film. The source argues this goes way beyond just rating a movie for audiences. It's an administrative attempt to legally sever the film from the judicially confirmed historical record. Furthermore, the text details how this kind of scrubbing extends right onto the internet. They point to Section 69A of India's IT Act, which allows the government to confidentially block digital information. Under this specific rule, the proceedings are entirely secret. Websites, social media accounts, or archives trying to report on this documented historical violence can just be blocked. It operates completely in the dark. Imagine trying to research your own local history, only to hit a silent 404 error. The authors describe it as a bureaucratic tool meant to block access to information without ever having to publicly justify why the censorship is happening. And finally, the archive shows how this control reaches directly into the classroom. The authors examine recent rationalizations of NCERT school textbooks. These revisions deleted sections on the 2002 Gujarat riots, they excised references to the 1984 anti-Sikh riots, completely removed chapters on Mughal history, and cut down material on caste discrimination. The author contends that this is actually the most durable, long-lasting form of censorship. By intentionally removing these specific events from textbooks, they argue the state is preemptively stripping future generations of the civic vocabulary they would even need to understand or articulate state violence later in their lives. So, to wrap up this explainer, we're left with this really provocative final question posed by the source material. When the physical architecture is demolished or Disneyfied, when the administrative records are hidden or scrubbed, and when the classroom textbooks are literally rewritten, who actually holds the power to narrate history? It really forces us to consider the true lasting cost of systematic erasure and reminds us why preserving a historical record, no matter how uncomfortable it might be, is absolutely crucial. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking questions about the history you're told.